Oblivious to the $50 million fortune awaiting them, the two siblings found themselves cast out by their white adoptive family following their birth parents' death. Patricia Wellington stood with folded arms, addressing Marcus and his younger sister Kesha as they stood in what had been their home for a decade and a half. "You have 2 days to collect your belongings and leave," she declared. "Our responsibility toward you has ended." The icy tone from the woman Marcus had called mother all these years pierced him more painfully than any weapon could. Having just turned 21, he had recently lost his birth parents in a tragic automobile crash merely 14 days earlier. Now both he and 17-year-old Kesha faced homelessness. "But we're family to you," Kesha whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "This has been our home all our lives." Richard Wellington remained focused on his newspaper, not bothering to glance up. "Blood relatives are what truly matter, child. It's time you both learned independence." A wave of rage and shock washed over Marcus. The Wellingtons had taken him in at age 6 following his paternal grandmother's passing. Throughout 15 years, he had genuinely felt like a member of this comfortable white middle-class household. He had excelled academically, graduating as valedictorian and securing a complete engineering scholarship, constantly striving to demonstrate his worthiness of their love and support. Unknown to him, Patricia and Richard had uncovered something among his biological parents' paperwork following the burial, something that had made them visibly anxious and determined to remove the adopted siblings from their lives. "Did our birth parents leave any inheritance for us?" Marcus inquired, a growing suspicion forming in his thoughts. "Any funds or insurance policies?" "Only debts," Patricia responded hastily. "Nothing but financial obligations. That's the reason you must go. We cannot shoulder additional monetary burdens." Marcus studied Patricia's expression as she spoke. Something seemed off, a nervousness, an urgency that didn't match someone genuinely concerned about finances. The Wellingtons, after all, resided in an Alpharetta estate, owned 3 imported vehicles, and Patricia possessed purses worth more than minimum wage earnings. "Could you possibly grant us 7 days?" Kesha begged. "To locate somewhere to live." 48 hours, Richard reiterated, finally folding his newspaper with a crisp sound. "And remove only your original possessions. Everything else remains here." During that evening, while Kesha wept in the bedroom they would share for their final night after 15 years, Marcus remained wakeful, thinking deeply. The Wellingtons had never shown warmth, yet they had never displayed cruelty before either. This sudden coldness, this haste to eliminate them immediately after receiving their biological parents' documentation, something felt wrong. He retained vague memories of his real parents, David and Angela Carter, as dedicated, caring individuals. David had been employed by a transportation company, while Angela taught school, straightforward, honorable people who perished too early in an unforeseeable accident. Yet if they had been so ordinary, why did the Wellingtons appear so anxious to sever any ties to their legacy? As everyone around him slumbered, Marcus experienced an instinct that would transform everything. If this tale of unfairness and family resonated with you, please remember to subscribe to our channel, because the Wellingtons remained unaware that every cruel action they performed was being meticulously watched by someone harboring secrets far greater than 2 orphan children could conceive. 2 days later, Marcus and Kesha sat on a bench in an all-night restaurant, carrying 2 backpacks that held their entire worldly possessions. The bank card Marcus attempted to use at the cash machine had been deactivated. The Wellingtons had eliminated his access to the shared account that had existed throughout his teenage years. "They actually went through with it," Kesha mumbled, stirring the lukewarm coffee she couldn't manage to drink. 15 years discarded as if we had never mattered. Marcus observed the early morning commuters through the grimy diner window, rideshare drivers, overnight workers, individuals who, like them now, existed on society's edges while the Wellingtons had moved comfortably through their privileged world. "Something's not right about this entire situation," he stated, retrieving a wrinkled photograph from his pocket that he had salvaged, his birth parents at his high school graduation ceremony. "Do you recall how Mom Angela constantly mentioned that Dad David was meticulous with finances, how he organized everything carefully?" Kesha nodded. "She mentioned he frequently discussed leaving provisions for you both, how he obsessed over insurance policies and investments." "Precisely. Yet suddenly the Wellingtons discover he died with outstanding debts." Marcus shook his head. "Someone like Dad doesn't pass away leaving financial obligations behind, Kesha. He leaves arrangements." Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Patricia Wellington. "I hope you secured accommodations. We cleared your bedroom and gave your old belongings to charitable organizations. Best wishes for your future." The casual indifference of that text felt like a physical blow. 15 years of shared holidays, birthday celebrations, graduation ceremonies, and now Patricia addressed them like bothersome strangers finally removed from her property. She donated our possessions, Marcus muttered, displaying his phone to Kesha, including the chest that Grandpa David left for us. Marcus felt the color drain from his complexion, the small wooden container David Carter had given them as children, instructing them to store valuable items inside it. They had never opened it, being too young when they received it, then forgetting about it in the back of their closet. "I'm calling her," Marcus declared, dialing rapidly. "Hello." Patricia's voice carried irritation. "Patricia, this is Marcus. Regarding our belongings, there was a small wooden box in the closet that belonged to our biological father." "Oh, yes. That went to charity as well. Why do you ask?" "There could have been important items inside. Papers, family photographs." "Marcus, dear." Patricia's tone became patronizing, as if addressing a difficult child. "You must move forward. Holding on to keepsakes from the past won't help you create a future." "Which charitable organization?" "I can't recall. Richard handled those arrangements." A pause. "Marcus, I genuinely hope you find success, but please refrain from contacting us again. This chapter of our lives has concluded." The call ended. Marcus stared at his phone, cold fury building in his chest. The woman who had raised him, who had attended his school events, who had cared for him during illnesses, now spoke to him like an annoying solicitor. "They disposed of the chest deliberately," he told Kesha. "They were too eager to eliminate everything." Kesha frowned. "Do you believe they are hiding something?" "I believe they are concealing a great deal." Marcus opened the second-hand laptop he had purchased with earnings from college part-time work. If the Wellingtons assumed two young orphans would simply vanish quietly, they were gravely mistaken. At 21, Marcus possessed one quality they had completely undervalued: the relentless determination of someone who had grown up constantly proving his value. "What are you doing?" Kesha asked. "Investigating." Marcus began typing. "If Dad truly left us anything, it will be documented somewhere. Legal documents, insurance policies, bank records, they always create a paper trail." During the following hours, as the diner filled and emptied around them, Marcus searched through public records, government databases, anything he could locate about David Carter and his transportation company. His discoveries reinforced his conviction that something was amiss. David Carter wasn't merely a regular employee. He held minority ownership in the company, had multiple properties registered under his name, and maintained at least 3 traceable bank accounts. Most significantly, he had filed legal documents with the county clerk's office just 6 months before his death. "Kesha," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "David created a will. It's documented here in public records." "What does it contain?" "That's what we'll discover tomorrow at the courthouse." Marcus closed his laptop, cold resolve settling into his bones. The Wellingtons had committed a critical error. They had underestimated the intelligence of a young black man from humble beginnings who had learned early that for people like him, genuine protection came from knowledge and preparation. Every act of disdain, every condescending facade that Patricia and Richard had offered was being carefully recorded in Marcus's memory. They believed they had eliminated a problem, but actually, they had created an adversary who would persist until he uncovered the truth. And something told Marcus that the truth would prove far more significant and devastating than 2 desperate orphans could ever imagine. The following morning, Marcus and Kesha arrived at the probate court entrance as it opened. The clerk, a middle-aged man wearing thick glasses, required only 15 minutes to locate David Carter's will in the archives. "Here it is," he said, providing a copy. "Filed 6 months before his passing. Quite comprehensive, I might add." Marcus began reading and felt reality shift around him. David Carter hadn't simply left an inheritance, he had left a business empire. Stock holdings in 4 corporations, real estate in 3 states, investment portfolios, life insurance, and a trust fund that had grown to exceed $50 million. "Kesha," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Look at this." Kesha read alongside him, her eyes widening. 50 million. "Marcus, this means." "It means the Wellingtons knew exactly what they were doing when they expelled us." The will was unambiguous. Everything was designated for Marcus upon reaching 21, with Kesha receiving her portion at 18. There were even detailed provisions for education, healthcare, and a designated trustee appointed to oversee the funds. The listed trustee was James Morrison, an estate attorney David had met through his work. Marcus contacted him immediately. Carter. Morrison's voice sounded surprised. My goodness, I've been attempting to reach you for 2 years. Where have you been? It's a lengthy story, Marcus replied. Can we meet today? 2 hours later, they sat in Morrison's elegant downtown Atlanta office. The lawyer, a black man in his 60s with a commanding presence, listened to their entire account in growing silence. Let me understand this correctly, he said finally. The Wellingtons adopted you, received the documents after your parents' death, and immediately disinherited you, claiming no inheritance existed. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And they destroyed or concealed everything that could connect us to our past. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk. Marcus, you turned 21 3 months ago. Legally, all of this already belongs to you. Kesha, you'll be 18 in 6 months, so your share will be released then as well. But how did they manage to hide this from us for so long? Because you were minors when adopted, and you trusted your adoptive parents to inform you of any inheritance. They simply deceived you. Morrison opened a drawer and retrieved a thick folder. I've documented everything. Attempted contacts, returned correspondence, unanswered emails. The Wellingtons systematically blocked all communication. Kesha leaned forward. So they committed crimes. Multiple crimes. Concealing inheritance, misappropriation, possibly fraud. We're discussing decades in prison if we can prove everything. Marcus felt an unusual calm wash over him. Can we prove it? Morrison smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes but promised justice. Marcus, my boy, I've documented every irregular action over the past 2 years. Blocked correspondence, ignored contact attempts, even investigations I hired to locate you. The Wellingtons don't realize it, but they've constructed a criminal case against themselves. That afternoon, while Morrison began handling the legal aspects, Marcus decided to do something he had been planning since the previous night. He called Patricia Wellington. Marcus. Her voice sounded irritated. I thought we made it clear we wanted no further contact. I just wanted to inform you that we found a place to stay, he lied. And that we're managing fine. That's good. We hope you get established. Actually, Patricia, I have a question. Do you remember the name of the attorney who handled my biological father's paperwork? There are some documents I need to complete for a job. There was a lengthy pause. I don't recall the name. And even if I did, I'm not sure it would be appropriate. Of course, I understand. I just thought perhaps you had kept a business card or something. But don't worry about it. Marcus, listen. Perhaps it's best to simply leave the past behind. Some matters are better left undisturbed. The nervousness in her voice was music to Marcus's ears. Why do you say that? Just that some things can become complicated, legally complicated for all parties involved. Marcus nearly smiled. Patricia was incriminating herself. I understand completely. Well, thank you anyway. After hanging up, he immediately called Morrison. She knows. She was nervous discussing legal complications. Is that evidence they knew about the inheritance? It's a beginning, but we'll need more. What kind of more? Morrison got straight to the point. We need them to confess or incriminate themselves more clearly. Would you have the courage to use a recording device the next time you spoke with her? Marcus thought about the coldness with which the Wellingtons had treated them, the speed with which they had discarded 15 years of adoptive family, the way Patricia had talked about leaving the past undisturbed. It wouldn't require courage, he said. It would be a pleasure. That night, Marcus and Kesha settled into a small apartment Morrison had arranged, temporarily paid for with an advance from the inheritance funds. For the first time in weeks, they had a secure place to sleep and time to strategize. Are you certain about this? Kesha asked. Confronting the Wellingtons directly? Marcus looked out the apartment window, watching the city lights illuminate. 2 days ago, they had been 2 homeless orphans rejected by the only family they had ever known. Now they had discovered they were multimillionaire heirs whose adoptive parents had committed fraud to hide it from them. Kesha, they watched us struggle, humiliated us, and discarded us like garbage. And throughout it all, they knew we were wealthier than they would ever be. Marcus picked up his phone, checking that the recording application was functioning. Now they're going to discover that they completely underestimated the wrong 2 people. The plan was straightforward. One final visit to the Wellingtons with innocent questions about documents and possible inheritances. With luck, Their arrogance would lead them to say something incriminating that could be used in court. What Marcus couldn't have predicted was that Patricia Wellington, in her growing paranoia, had spent the last 2 days consulting her own attorney and discovering exactly how much she and Richard stood to lose if the truth emerged. And desperate people, Marcus was about to learn, were capable of far more extreme actions than simply expelling 2 teenagers from their home. The next morning, Marcus and Kesha stood once again at the Wellington mansion's entrance. This time, however, Marcus carried something more than desperation. He carried a digital recorder in his pocket and absolute certainty that the next 15 minutes would change everything. Patricia opened the door with an angry expression that quickly transformed into poorly hidden nervousness. "Marcus, Kesha, what are you doing here?" "We just want to talk for 5 minutes," Marcus said, maintaining a calm voice, "about our biological father's documents." Richard appeared behind his wife, clearly agitated. "There's nothing to discuss. We've said everything that needed saying." "Actually," Marcus smiled slightly, "I don't think you've said half of what needs saying." The Wellingtons exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look guilty people share when they realize they might be in trouble. "Come in," Patricia said finally. "But make it brief." In the living room where they had grown up, Marcus watched the Wellingtons position themselves defensively on the sofa. 15 years of memories in this room, and now he finally understood that he had never truly been welcome here. "You knew about the inheritance," Marcus said directly. It wasn't a question. "What inheritance?" Richard attempted to sound genuinely confused, but his voice trembled slightly. "The 50 million my father left to me and Kesha." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia turned visibly pale, and Richard began fidgeting nervously with his watch. "We don't know what you're talking about," Patricia muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus retrieved some documents from his pocket. AWOL filed with the county clerk. Business interests, investment accounts, trust funds, all documented, all legal, all ours. "How did you get?" Richard began, then stopped abruptly. "Get what, Richard?" Marcus leaned forward. "How did we find out what you've been hiding from us for 2 years?" Patricia stood up abruptly. "We didn't hide anything. We just protected you from responsibilities you couldn't handle." "Protected us?" Kesha spoke for the first time, her voice heavy with disbelief. "By throwing us onto the street with nothing?" "You were too young for that kind of money," Richard exploded. "You would have wasted it all. At least this way you learned the value of hard work." Marcus almost smiled. They were incriminating themselves completely. "So you admit you knew about the money," he said calmly. Patricia realized her husband's mistake too late. We had our suspicions, but we were never certain." "You suspected enough to block all attempts by Mr. Morrison to contact us over the past 2 years, Marcus continued, watching panic grow on the Wellingtons' faces. "Morrison?" Patricia's voice emerged as a strangled whisper. "The estate administrator. He has documented every returned letter, every ignored email, every contact attempt that you systematically blocked." Richard tried one last desperate defense. "Even if that were true, you could never prove we did it intentionally." "Actually," Marcus stood up, "we already have." That was when Morrison entered the room, followed by 2 private investigators and a bailiff. The expression on Patricia's face was pure horror. "How did you get into my house?" "Kesha opened the back door for us 5 minutes ago," Morrison replied calmly, "while you were confessing to serious crimes on our recording devices." Richard tried to stand up, but his legs felt like jelly. "Recording devices? You can't, that's not legal." "Actually," Morrison smiled, "it's perfectly legal to record a conversation when you have consent from one of the parties." And Marcus and Kesha gave their consent. One of the investigators approached Patricia with a document. "Mrs. Wellington, you're being formally notified of a civil action for concealment of inheritance, misappropriation, and malicious interference in family relations." "And that's just the beginning," Morrison added. "The district attorney's office is also interested in the criminal implications of what you've done." Patricia collapsed onto the sofa, her hands covering her face. "We just wanted to protect the children. They were so young." "Protect?" Marcus finally allowed some anger to show in his voice. "You expelled us from our home. You left us homeless. You watched us struggle for 2 years knowing we were wealthier than you'd ever be." Richard tried one last desperate defense. "The money was safe. You're getting it all back." "You're getting it all back, plus interest, plus punitive damages, plus compensation for suffering," Morrison confirmed. "And you're paying all legal costs on both sides." Kesha looked around the mansion where she had grown up, seeing it with completely new eyes. You know what's sad? If you had been honest with us, we would still be a family. Now you're just two strangers who committed crimes against us. The bailiff handed over more documents. We also have an order freezing all Wellington assets until the matter is settled in court. Patricia finally raised her head, her eyes red and desperate. Marcus, Kesha, please. We loved you like our own children. We made a mistake. But no, Marcus interrupted firmly. Parents don't expel their children from their home. Parents don't lie about inheritances. Parents don't watch their children suffer when they have the power to help. Morrison nodded to the investigators. I think we have everything we need here. As they left the mansion for the last time, Marcus heard Patricia sobbing and Richard yelling on the phone with some lawyer about damage control. How do you feel? Morrison asked as they walked to the car. Marcus looked back one final time at the house where he had spent 15 years believing he was loved. I feel liberated. But true freedom, Marcus was about to discover, would not come from exposing the truth. It would come from building something so magnificently successful that the Wellingtons would spend the rest of their lives regretting underestimating the two children they discarded like trash. 6 months later, Marcus sat in the office of the technology consulting firm he had established with part of his inheritance, looking out over Atlanta from the 30th floor. At 22, he had already created 15 jobs and was negotiating contracts that would transform the lives of hundreds of families. Kesha, now 18 and officially heir to her share of the 50 million, had chosen a different but equally impactful path. She had enrolled in law school with a focus on civil rights, determined to help other families navigate what they had faced. Did you see today's news? She asked, entering the office with a newspaper in her hands. Marcus smiled. He had seen it. The headline read, Alpharetta elite couple convicted of $1 million inheritance fraud. The photograph showed Patricia and Richard Wellington being escorted from the courthouse in handcuffs. The complete investigation had revealed an even broader scheme. The Wellingtons weren't just cruel, they were systematic criminals. It turned out they had done the same thing to 2 other adoptive families over the years, always choosing black orphan children whose biological parents had left significant property or life insurance. 5 years in prison for each of them, Kesha read aloud, plus full restitution, compound interest, and punitive damages. The judge said it was one of the most calculated and cruel frauds he had ever seen. Morrison had done masterful work. Not only had they recovered the original inheritance, but the Wellingtons were ordered to pay additional damages totaling another $10 million. The mansion where Marcus and Kesha had grown up was auctioned off to pay the legal bills. But true justice had come in the form of complete public humiliation. The case had become a national sensation, and the Wellingtons became national symbols of racism disguised as charity. Patricia lost all her friends in her elite social circle. Richard was fired from his financial consulting firm when clients began canceling contracts. You know what's most satisfying? Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. It's not even the money. It's that now everyone knows exactly who they are. Belle Wellington, the Wellingtons' biological daughter, had done something surprising. She had publicly sought out Marcus and Kesha to apologize for what her parents had done. She was working as a nurse and living modestly, having rejected any money that might have come from the fraudulent scheme. You didn't deserve to go through this, she said with tears in her eyes. I always knew my parents were cold, but I never imagined they were capable of something like this. You are more family to me than they ever were. The foundation Marcus and Kesha had created, the David Carter Foundation, had already helped more than 50 adoptive families uncover hidden or stolen inheritances. They hired a team of investigators who specialized in tracking down similar frauds. Morrison, who had become more than a lawyer to them, he was almost a surrogate father, had created a legal protocol that other families could follow. The Carter Protocol was being used by lawyers across the country. Remember when Patricia said some things were better left alone? Kesha laughed. That some issues could be legally complicated. Marcus shook his head, still incredulous at the arrogance the Wellingtons had displayed until the very end. She was right about one thing. It was legally complicated, for them. Last weekend, Marcus had purchased a modest but comfortable house in the same neighborhood where he and Kesha had spent those nights homeless in the diner. Not because he needed to save money, but because he wanted to remember where they had come from. Have you ever thought about what our life would be like if they had been honest? Kesha asked. Marcus considered the question. Would probably be living comfortably, but still dependent on them. We would never have discovered our own strength. The irony was not lost on him. The Wellingtons' cruelty had forced Marcus and Kesha to become stronger, more independent, and more determined than they would ever have been if they had grown up spoiled with easy money. Patricia Wellington was now living in a government-subsidized apartment, working in a laundromat to pay off her remaining legal debts. Richard sold insurance over the phone, a job he got only because he omitted his criminal conviction on the application. The final narrative loop was perfectly closed. The two children they had dismissed as too young to handle money now ran a financial and philanthropic empire, while the adults who considered themselves superior struggled to pay their basic bills. You know what the best part of all this is? Marcus said, looking at the photo of David and Angela Carter on his desk. Our real parents didn't just leave us money. They left us values. And those values guided us to do the right thing. Kesha smiled. The best revenge really is success. Marcus nodded, watching the city move below. The Wellingtons tried to destroy us, but they ended up destroying themselves. We learned that true wealth isn't in the money you inherit. It's in the character you build when no one is watching. The story of Marcus and Kesha Carter proved a simple but powerful truth. When you try to bury people of integrity, you sometimes forget that some seeds grow best in the dark. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. What was the greatest injustice you've ever faced, and how did you overcome it? Sometimes our greatest enemies end up being our best teachers.